Hello, it's Dr. Brian McDonough, and welcome to the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. My special guest is Patti Brennan, author of Am I Going to Be Okay? She is globally recognized as a financial advisor, and she put together a book looking at some of the things that people need to be worried about, not just financially, but some of those very important issues that have nothing to do with money. Special guest Patti Brennan coming up right after this. It's exciting to have you because I really believe you have a unique approach to people as they're considering retirement. I mean, obviously, finances are important and that's your expertise, but you don't worry about finances. You're worrying about lifestyle, being ready for it, focus, all those things. Tell me a little about yourself and why you take that approach.
Well, Brian, I think a lot has to do with the way I was brought into this industry from medicine, similar to you, right? I was an ICU nurse. And as the nurse at the bedside, it was so important for me to understand holistically everything that was going on with that patient. The same thing goes with people and their money. People are not a pie chart. I tell clients all the time, don't let anybody hyper focus on just your portfolio. You're not a pie chart. You are a husband, a wife, a family, and you are so much more than just your money. So, when we talk about this whole thing called financial planning, what is a financial plan? It's just a blueprint. People come to me all the time, Brian, and they say, I want to retire. We're retiring in a year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case might be. And we want to be ready. And my question is, what does ready mean to you? It's kind of like the book. Am I going to be okay? What does okay mean to you? Because it's different for everybody. What are you retiring from? But more importantly, what are you retiring to? There's always the honeymoon period, doing the honeydew list and getting stuff done and maybe traveling a little bit, but that gets old really fast. And for whatever it's worth, I've been doing this a long time, AKA I've got lots of wrinkles. And by the way, I've earned every single one and they're staying. But there's a lot to be said for the fact that we've helped hundreds, if not over 1,000 people, couples retire and stay retired and happy, just happy and content and fulfilled. You get to do it once. We kind of know what's ahead and you want to avoid some of the landmines. And part of them is understanding what your new purpose is going to be. How are you going to fill your days after that honeydew list is done? How are you going to spend your time? And where are you going to get your personal fulfillment from? Those are the questions that aren't asked that I think are so important. I didn't want to write a book. Forbes Books approached me and had heard me speak and basically said, we've been following you, Patti Brennan, and we're wondering if you have a book in that brain of yours. And Brian, that was the last thing in my brain, right? I'm like, no, there is no book in here. I have no time. I've got people that I want to focus on. And they said, well, think about all the people that you can touch and reach by taking what you know and putting it in writing. And it was between that idea and then I have a client advisory board, and they said to me, Patti, when we're in your conference room, the way you explain things, we get it. Because Brian, I'm a former nurse and I've got over 30 people who work for me. They're really, really smart. And I keep on saying, wait a minute, explain this in a way that I can understand, because people they're not going to act on something that they don't understand. So we communicate in ways and make comparisons and use stories and metaphors so they get it. So that was it. It was just really, and this one client said, it would really be great if we could have something that we could go to almost as a reference. Am I going to be okay? And is okay enough? And by the way, most importantly, what does okay mean to you? So that's why I wrote it.
So when someone is, we can pick an age, it can be 50, 55, 60, whatever, they're contemplating retiring. What do they need to do to get ready?
I think the psychological is so important. And, Brian, and maybe you could help everybody watching and listening today, because to me, there are two things that are important to people: their health and their money. And when they're not sure, anxiety increases. And especially in a couple, I find usually one person does the house stuff, the kids, the whole bit, and the other person does the money. It's the person who is not familiar with this who has very high anxiety. So I'm going to ask you, and I sort of know, but why don't you help us out? What does anxiety do to the body?
As you get anxious, you release cortisol, stress hormone. Stress hormone increases inflammation. Inflammation affects every part of your body. When we were worrying about COVID-19, COVID-19's biggest weapon was it increased inflammation. The body started to attack itself. And that's why people were attacked at their weakness. If they had joint pain, it was going there. If it was lungs, it was going there. And if it was a risk for a stroke, it was going there. And that's why COVID was so devastating, because it really took the endothelial lining of our blood cells, which go everywhere, and caused inflammation. Stress does that. Now, obviously, stress, a day-to-day stress, isn't going to get you like a COVID, but it beats you down over time. So if you're stressed out all the time, your blood pressure is just a little higher. Blood pressure is a little higher day after day, week after week. That starts to have an impact on the heart. If the stress is there and you have issues with your blood sugar, day after day, week after week, the sugar creeps up. Before you know, you're pre-diabetic, then you're diabetic, then you have metabolic syndrome, and then you're a little overweight and you're carrying weight in the wrong places. It's all related to stress. And if you talk to somebody who's young and they talk about stress, they'll tell you the best way they reduce stress is to exercise. They say, when I exercise, I feel a lot better about stress. I clear my head. Well, that's no accident, because the reason we have stress at any level comes back to when we were being chased around by saber-toothed tigers. They were chasing us. They're moving along, and we had to run, and we had to have that stress hormone going. Well, now, day to day, we don't go anywhere where we're running from tigers. Many people are sitting at their desk on a computer day after day. And where does that stress go? And to your point, when people add the stress of the future and what's happening, and they feel powerless and they don't have an answer, that can really have an impact long term.
That is such a great explanation. I didn't realize the impact of the inflammation during COVID-19 and the crisis that we had. So is this an accurate statement, Brian, that stress just releases those low levels of cortisol into the bloodstream, and it's like an acid eating away at the most important organs in our bodies? Is that an accurate statement?
It's an effective statement. And the thing about stress is it affects all parts of our body. It'd be one thing if it was just, affecting your right elbow, but no, it affects everything. In fact, it affects our brain, it affects our heart, it affects our like I mentioned, our blood sugar, our GI process, all those things. So here you have somebody who's 55 years old. They're contemplating retirement. They're worried about what they may have put away, not put away, where they are financially. They're on Facebook. And on Facebook, they see everybody else seems to be going on vacation. They're all going to the best restaurants with whoever they want. And they feel like they're getting nowhere, and the stress builds. And the biggest damage that's being done is on their body, because that's eating away at them. I mean, that's the way I view it.
Right. It's so interesting. And I think it's so powerful also because, the thing about it is the effects of it can't be felt right away. It's just underlying, and it just builds up and builds up and builds up. And all of a sudden, the stroke happens, the heart attack happens, something happens physiologically that are the result of the stress over the many, many years that people have felt it. To me, the most effective way of preventing that is to do the modeling, is to go through scenarios. It's like I put in the book. And I'm not a fan of the things you get on the internet. I think they are fairy tales, but getting with a good CFP, a certified financial planner, to say, if I continue doing everything I'm currently doing, am I going to make it? What if, and then stress test that thing. What if the market goes into a really bad bear market? Are we still okay? And then come up with the strategies so that when the time happens, you just go into that period of ambiguity, because that's what it is. Those first 6 months, year, 3 years, it's a period of ambiguity. How am I going to replace my paycheck? Where's the money going to come from? What are the tax implications? Because we want to be smart with our money. And people don't often know the strategies. Personal financial management is, when it's done right, it's really complicated because one decision affects 10 others. When do we take Social Security? Well, that's a really good question. It depends on where the cash flow is coming from. And by the way, depending on that answer, some of the Social Security might be taxable or most of it. What do you want? And especially in a couple, I was having a conversation last week with a couple, and I was focused on their health and their family history. And they were kind of looking at me like, why are you asking us these questions? Don't you want to know about our 401k? I said, that's fine. That's information, but I want to learn about you, because that'll have a much bigger impact on the decisions that you make. And we want to help you make the smart decisions. I find that when people come into my office, they really kind of like the fact that I used to be a nurse. In fact, when I first started in as a CFP, I didn't tell anybody because I thought it would undermine my credibility. Actually, now it is so additive because people appreciate the fact that I'm just like them. And I didn't understand this stuff either. And I want to help them to get to the next side. I think they also appreciate the fact that I do understand the things that are important and take the time to listen. Again, to me, Brian, there's a difference between empathy and compassion, right? So people say, oh, you're a nurse, you've got so much empathy. And empathy is great, but if you're my patient and you're crashing, holding your hand isn't going to save your life. Compassion is action-oriented. It's understanding what's normal for you and being ready so that when you start throwing all those PVCs and having that abnormal rhythm, I've got the right medicine to the left of your monitor and I know what to do. It's action-oriented. That's basically what a real financial planner does, is to understand not only how you're tracking, but where you might be vulnerable. And we're ready. We're ready for whatever might come about. We never know what it is. And it could be something market related, it could be government related, or it could be personal. You've got a child who needs to go into a rehab. Believe me, you'd be surprised at the things that I've gotten involved in. We got to get that kid in a rehab to take care of his addiction, because that's affecting you and it's affecting the family and it's affecting the decisions that you're making. It's okay. We've seen it all. There is zero judgment. Let's just work together. If you continue doing everything what you're doing, are you going to be okay? And by the way, how do you define okay? And if things aren't quite working out, where are you vulnerable? And what can we do today to make sure those things never happen to you? That is it in a nutshell. Am I going to be okay? And what are some of the landmines what are some of the questions that I don't even know to ask, that I should be asking relative to what we're doing or will be doing? To me, those are the big questions. And also, what fills you up? I think that's a really important question. Where do you get your purpose? Because as you can probably imagine, you've probably had this happen to you, Brian, just because I know. I mean, can I just say that I don't know that I've come across a physician with so much emotional intelligence as you, Brian. You've got it. And I think the fact that we're even having this conversation is incredible. There's no question in my mind why you're so successful and why this podcast is off the charts, because of that emotional intelligence. And I think that's what's often missing in the professional fields that we came from. And I always like to give people alternatives where they can kick the tires themselves without having an ongoing obligation. I think that works. It's just a matter of just making sure the chemistry is there and making sure these people really care about you and it's not BS.
Patti Brennan is the author of Am I Going to Be Okay? You also have a podcast. I've seen your podcast. Where can people see your podcast if they want to? Because you've got a whole library of talks you've done and interviews.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brian. Doing podcasts, this to me was something that I wanted to do for my clients because they were calling with questions. And I thought, you know what? What are the questions we're getting? Let's do a podcast on it. So we have Ask Patti Brennan. Anybody can go to my website at www.keyfinancialinc.com. All the podcasts are listed based on what you might want to hear about. It's really interesting because it really was my opportunity to share what we were thinking, what we were doing, where I was going. I do a conference, podcast because you know the springtime I'm going to a lot of conferences and I'm learning a lot. So I come back and I do a podcast. These are the things that I've learned, and it's a great way for me to be able to share. The other unintended benefit that we've gotten is when I want to learn about something, I go to my team and I say, okay, let's do a podcast on the Federal Reserve because I don't understand what these open market operations are all about. Let's boil it down so that people can understand what the Federal Reserve is doing to help our economy. So that's the reason for it. And it makes us better.
Thanks for your time and spending the time with us on the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. Patty, it was great having you with us.
Thank you so much, Brian. You are a great podcaster. I'm so impressed. I love your podcast, and good for everybody who is watching and listening to your podcast because this guy is the best.
Well, thank
Thank you
you. I
all.
really appreciate that. Thank you.